Hello, everyone. Before moving forward to the session, am I properly audible? Can someone just type something in the chat? Perfect. Um, so with that done, I will be starting this session promptly. Previously, we were discussing on verbal reasoning, the first category among the three categories that will come in PRAGATII exam. Today, we're going to continue where we left off last time. Last time we did analogies, antonyms, up to one-word substitutions, and idioms and phrases. Today we're going to do the parts that are highlighted in orange. That is to mean fill in the blanks, grammar, and sentence correction, right? So these three are really important. So we'll directly move and do the discussion. And so for today's topic, we'll be discussing on three things, right? First, we'll be discussing on what grammar is, parts of the speech, and subject-verb agreement. They all fall under the category of grammar. Second up, we'll be discussing about fill in the blanks. And lastly, we'll be discussing on sentence correction, right? With that said, let's promptly move on to the grammar part. But before moving forward, if you guys have got any questions or if you guys are confused at any point, feel free to text me in the chat box, all right? Grammar. What is grammar, right? So grammar is basically the set of rules that explain how words are used in a language. Now, there's an obvious question at this point, right? Do we really need to study grammar to learn a particular language, right? So in short, you don't need to really learn about grammars, right? In fact, most of us, while learning about our native language, did not really start by learning about grammars in the first place, right? We simply started by speaking the language, by observing people around us, by observing their behavior, by the way they spoke, and we simply started mimicking them, right? And so over the process of time, we started learning our language more fluently. But since English is our second language and it's not our native language, it is really important for us to think of grammatical structures and grammatical correctness of our sentences or the words that we are speaking, right? This will help us to convey what we are trying to convey, right? Otherwise, what you say may have a different meaning, or what you say may be perceived in a different manner, right? And that may not always work on your favor. So it's really important to learn grammar, considering that English is our second language. Now, grammar contains something called parts of the speech, right? So speech is something that we speak. It's a verbal form of this language. So there are 8 parts of speech in the English language, right? First is noun, pronoun, verb, adjective, adverb, preposition, conjunction, and interjection, right? Most of you might have already been familiar with all of these, but we'll quickly revise on these if you aren't. So no worries there. Noun. Noun is a word that names something, right? For example, it may name a person, right? John, Abraham, or anyone, Suyash or anyone. A place, it can be any place, right? India, Nepal, Pakistan. A thing, shoe, ball, anything, or an idea as well, right? For instance, love or idea in and of itself is a noun, right? So there are a few examples of the noun. You guys can quickly skim over those. Noun is one of the most basic of parts of the speech, and it's really important as well in spoken English and even in written English as well. So it's important to keep what nouns are or where they are coming in sentences in mind. Pronoun. Pronoun is a word that is substituted in the place of nouns, right? For instance, when you start speaking, you don't always use names to represent a certain thing, right? Initially, you may begin with a name to clarify that you are speaking of a particular thing. But once you start building upon that idea or building on that sentence, you don't constantly use the same name over and over again, right? You rather replace it with he, she, I, you, or who, whichever is appropriate in that particular circumstance, right? So pronouns are replacement for nouns in a nutshell. Next up, we've got adjectives. Now, adjectives are words that describe the qualities or states of beings of noun, right? For instance, if we've got noun, nouns are not self-explanatory, right? That is to mean we have to use other words to explain what the noun really is, right? To explain the properties that the noun possesses, right? For instance, when you are talking about a building, right? When you simply say building, it does not really convey a proper or concise message about that building to the listener, right? But when you say an enormous building, what you mean is that the building is really immense in size, right? So adjectives are used to describe noun. Silly is so, for instance, there are other adjectives as well: dog-like, silly, yellow, fun, fast, and so on. The list goes on and on, right? Hopefully everyone's clear on adjectives. Next up, verbs. Now, verbs are words that describe actions. It may be physical or mental as well, right? Verbs also describe a state of being, like the verbs be, become, or exist. So verbs are basically used to describe things that we do, right? So things that we do is not encompassed in nouns. So the idea of verbs is to be introduced at this point, right? For instance, walking, laughing, swimming, playing, eating, drinking, all of these are encompassed under verbs, right? They are action words per se. They describe a particular action or a thing that you are doing or thinking at times. Next up, we've got adverb. Now, adverb is a word that describes a verb, right? For instance, when I say he was running, that might give you a picture of a particular person running, right? But it did not explain anything else, right? So you may not know if he was running slow or if he was running fast, right? At this point, verbs come into play. Adverbs come into play, right? Adverbs describe the quality of the verb, right? For instance, if I say he was running very fast, then very fast describes his speed, right? Or the way he was running. So very fast is adverb in this case, right? Everyone's clear on this. Now we've got tenses as well, right? So as I mentioned before, verbs describe action, right? Now there is a thing called tenses in the case of verbs, right? Tenses describe the time at which the action happened or is happening or will happen, right? So there are three states particularly: past, which describes event of the past or events that have already occurred; present, which describes events that are happening right now, right? And future, which describes events that will happen or that are contingent or likely to happen in the future, right? So there are different types of tenses as well, even in present, past, and future, right? Simple present is usually used to describe habits. So I've got a particular sentence here: I read nearly every day. And I've used the same sentence to describe a particular thing in different time frames, right? For instance, this is in present, this is in past, this is in future, and so on, right? So in simple present, it's I read nearly every day. I describe a habit. In simple past, it can be last night I read an entire novel, right? In future, it can be I will read as much as I can this year, right? So there are a few things that you have to keep in mind, right? So read, right? The form of the verb that we are using at this case, right? So read is a V1, the first form of the verb, and so it's used to describe the activity that is happening in the present, right? In this case, it's not a read, it's a read, right? The spelling is the same, but this describes an event of the past. It's called V2, right? And in this case, it's read as well. I will read, which describes a particular event of the future, right? Same thing, same case with the present continuous and past continuous and future continuous as well, right? So in this case, we use the fourth form of the verb called reading, right? ing, right? In all of these, right? Just the difference would be I am or the be verb, right? In this case, am is the be verb, was, and will, right? I was reading Edgar Allan Poe last night. I will be reading Nathaniel Hawthorne soon, right? Now, present perfect. In this case, we use a third form of the verb. I have read, right? So this is not a read, it's read. Now notice the contrast, right? In this case, we were using read, the first form, but in the case of present perfect, we are using the third form of the verb called I have read, right? Now the same case will be the same with past perfect and future perfect as well. Now in the case of present perfect continuous, we'll be using the fourth form of the verb as well, reading, but we'll simply be introducing have been or had been or will have been in the sentences, right? So hopefully this makes things clear. This slide is a bit descriptive, so it would be really helpful if you guys took a screenshot of this and revise on these examples, right? Looking at the form of the verbs or the skeletal structure of these sentences as well. So I'll be leaving it for a few seconds there so you guys can quickly take a screenshot. Perfect. So we'll be revising a few questions, right? So this sentence, while making a noise, has a which form of the verb. So if someone, I'll be waiting for a few seconds. So if you guys can quickly reply in the chat. All right. I'm getting answers from Sam, Samjana, Ritik, Bolis, everyone. All right. So most of you are saying that it's option number 2. Let's check. Yep, it definitely is option number 2. Great job, guys. So why are you making a noise, right? Because it's why are you making the ing form or the fourth form of the verb? So it's present continuous tense, right? There's are and there's ing form of the verb. So it's the present continuous tense. Great job. Next question. The same drill. All right, I'm getting answers from Ajay, Samjana, Ritik. Most of you are saying it's 3, so let's check on that. Yep, it definitely is because it's almost clear, right? I am going to, right? This is a very generic future verb describing phrase. So keep this in mind as well, right? I'm going to be a teacher when I grow up. It shows that you have a dream or you have an aspiration, and that's generally encapsulated under the future tense. So it's the future tense, right? Pretty easy to see. The next question. The sentence this has a which form of the verb? All right, Ajay says it's past perfect. Samjana says it's past perfect as well. Most of you are saying it's past perfect as well. Let me quickly check. Sadly, that's not the case, right? So the thing is, to be past perfect, there has to be a had as well in the sentence, right? But in this case, it's simply in 2019, a disease destroyed the crops in a village, right? Had it been in 2019, a disease had destroyed the crops in one village, then this would have been past perfect tense, right? But considering that it's only destroyed and there's no have form of the verb, preceding that, it's simple past tense, right? Hopefully that makes things clear. Now we'll be moving on to other parts of the speech. I think I already described about adverbs, so I won't be going through this. Preposition, right? So preposition is a part of the speech which describes where the location of a thing in simple words, right? For instance, take a look at this example, right? The coffee is on the table beside you, right? Notice the things that on and beside are fulfilling in this sentence, right? So on describes that the coffee lies on the table. That is to mean it lies above the table, right on the table. It is staying there. And beside represents that the table is right beside you, right? That is to mean it is in your side, right? So on and beside are used to describe location of a particular thing or a particular noun in this case, which is coffee. So they are prepositions. But for instance, at times preposition don't always represent locations, right? They can sometimes also represent things that you are going to do or some abstract ideas as well, right? For instance, in this case, we went for a walk. For is a preposition. And despite the rain, that is to mean we went for a walk despite the fact that it was raining. right? So for and despite are used as preposition in this case as well, right? Next up, conjunction. Conjunction are words that are used to link sentences, right? So one of the key ideas of succeeding in spoken or even in written English is the ability to make complex sentences, right? For instance, if all of your sentences sound really simple and sound really generic, as if they were being written by some child, then that does not really convey the level of academic fulfillment that you're trying to convey, right? So to be academically sound or to present yourself as in as scholarly way as possible, you have to use complex structures in your written form and even while speaking, right? So conjunctions come into play at that point, right? Words like for and nor, but, or, yet, so, and things as such are used to describe, are used to link to particular sentences, right? So keep this in mind as well. If you guys want, you guys can always take a screenshot of these slides in case they are a bit lengthy for me to explain, or if they are not really being comprehensible to you guys. So feel free to do that. Interjection. So interjections are used informally most of the times. Interjections are not usually seen in formal writings or in academic writings. For instance, words like wow and yay, which are used to convey some extreme form of emotions, they are called interjections, right? Wow, yay, and things of that nature. So we are done with parts of the speech. Now, next up, we'll be moving on to a subtopic that is subject-verb agreement, which most international speakers or most non-native speakers find quite confusing during their English journey, right? So subject-verb agreement is quite important in English. That is to mean that the verb and subject must have a proper combination in a sentence. So if you are using a particular subject, then you have to use verb that matches with the state of that subject. That is to mean if you are using a singular subject, the verb must also be singular. Now, what do I mean by this? Now, for instance, read this sentence, right? She see you. Now, that does not sound grammatically correct at all, right? The subject is see and the verb is see, right? She and see. Now, the correct form of this sentence would be she sees you, right? Because she is singular and sees is a singular form of the verb, right? Basically, when you add, or as a rule of thumb, keep this in your mind, when you add as to the end of a particular verb or es in some cases, then that verb becomes singular, right? So for instance, see in and of itself is a plural verb, right? But when you add an s at its end, then it becomes a singular verb. And that is the correct form or the correct sentence, right? She sees you. This is grammatically correct. In the same way, if the subject is plural, the verb must also be plural, right? Makes sense. Singular, singular, plural, plural, right? Read this sentence. We sees you, right? It does not really make sense grammatically, right? I mean, it may convey a particular message that you are being seen, but it does not sound correct at all, right? So the correct form is we see you. Why? Because sees is a singular form of the verb because there exists s at its end. And since we is plural subject, there has to be a plural verb. So we see you is the correct sentence, right? Because it contains proper subject verb agreement. On to next slide. Now, this is the golden rule of subject verb agreement, right? This is really important. So it would be great if you guys could take a screenshot. So what this is basically saying is if there's a singular verb subject, it generally means that the verb ends in s, right? As I mentioned before, singular verbs usually end in s, right? For instance, my mom is a singular subject, and so respects s should be added in the verb, right? To make the sentence grammatically correct, right? If there's a plural subject, then the verb does not end in s, right? For instance, in this case, we're talking about two people, my mom and dad. respect me, right? So my mom and dad are two people, so plural. So that's why the verb should be plural as well, which in this case is respect without the S, right? Respect only. So hopefully this is clear to you guys as well. Next up is subject verb. This is a small example, right? So for instance, take a look at this. The all sleeps all day, right? All is singular. And so we are using a singular verb, sleeps, S with an S, right? Now, when plural, the all sleep all day, right? Because when the subject is plural, the verb must be plural as well. So it's sleep all day. Um, yeah. Now, next up, we'll be doing a few exercises. Now, there are three sentences here, and there are two options, right? In the first, there's is an R, in the second, there's is an R, and in the third, there's is an R as well. So you guys need to choose the correct answers and text me the answers of each of these, right? I'm getting from Suresh, Samjana, Sam. All right, I'm getting quite a few answers here. So let's quickly check if the answers that you guys are saying is correct or not, right? Yep, the first sentence is Annie and her brothers are at school, right? Because we are dealing with plural subjects in this case, right? Now, in this case, there's one particular thing to note, right? If there were only Annie at this sentence, it would be Annie is at school, right? No questions there because Annie is singular, so the verb must be singular as well. But in this case, when we are introducing her brothers or this uh, idea of a plural subject here, then we have to use a plural verb in this case as well, right? Which is are. So it's Annie and her brothers are at school. Next up, we've got either my mother or my father is coming to the meeting, now, right? Now, this is a bit confusing. Why? Because there are clearly two subjects in this sentence. So you may ask the question, why did we not use the plural form of this verb, right? So the thing is, either or, this is a unique sentence structure, right? So either or basically represents that either my mother is coming or my father is coming, right? So in this case, now this is a general thing to keep in your mind. Whenever you see either or in a particular sentence, then 99% of the time it's going to take a singular verb, right? So keep this, ingrain this concept in your mind, right? Either or 99% of the times takes is as its verb, right? Or takes a singular form as its verb, which in this case happens to be is, right? So hopefully that's clear. That's a rule to keep in your mind, right? Now, next up, we've got the dogs or the cats are outside. Now, this is quite clear, right? So the dogs or the cats, there are plural forms in both of these, so it's going to be are in this case. All right, next three. I'll be waiting for a few seconds. You guys can text me the answers. All right. I'm getting quite a few answers here. All right, so I'll quickly be revealing the answers to these three questions, right? All right. Either my shoes or your coat is always on the floor. As I mentioned before, either or, this sentence always takes a singular verb, or most of the times it takes a singular verb. So whenever you see either or, you can most of the times always use a singular verb in those cases. Now here, George and Tamara, they are plural. I mean, the subject is plural, right? Because there are two people, and so it will be don't, because plural don't is the plural verb of form of doesn't, right? So it's don't in this case. I mean, you can also think of it in this way, right? Doesn't contains s, and so singular verbs contain s, so doesn't is singular while don't is plural, right? So I mean, there are lots of ways of seeing this thing. Benito does not know the answer. Benito is a singular subject, So does not is a singular verb, and so that's the correct answer here because Benito does not know the answer, right? Hopefully that's clear to everyone. Now, next up, we'll be moving to fill in the blanks, right? So these types of questions, fill in the blanks types of questions, require you to fill in the blank with the correct option, right? As the name implies. So in this case, usually either you have to fill in the proper preposition, or in some cases, I've seen tenses being asked as well, right? But most of the times, it's always about prepositions, right? So we'll quickly be practicing questions on this because there's not really much to explain. It's just an extrapolation of the extra parts of the speech. So we'll be quickly going over this, right? So I've already revealed the answer, but I'll just be explaining this just in case, right? Just as an example. Since she failed in the examination, she prefers to remain aloof from her friends, right? So from, that's the correct preposition to be used at this particular point. To remain aloof means to remain away from or to remain anonymous, right? So in this case, from is the proper preposition to be used, right? So there is no golden rule that properly mentions which preposition should be used where, right? This comes from deliberate practice, and I'll be present providing some resources at the end of this discussion, which will greatly aid you for practicing these types of questions, right? Hopefully, everyone's clear on this. The answer is one. Next question. All right. You guys will be solving this. I'll be waiting for a few seconds. All right. I'm getting quite a few answers here. So most of you are saying for on the campus there is much protest for want of proper management. Now there are a few things to be. There's a small caveat to be noted here, right? So there two prepositions can fit into this problem, right? On the campus, there is much protest in want of proper management, also works in this case. But on the campus, there's much protest for want of proper management, also works in this case, right? But in the modern sense, or in modern English, in is the preferred choice. So that's the correct answer at this case, right? But I've also seen for being used in many textbooks. And so I guess that's where you guys are coming from. But I personally prefer using in, and I've seen this in most modern textbooks. So that's the correct answer for me at this point, right? So I think you guys should also shift your perspectives towards in at this case rather than relying on for, right? So the correct answer in this case is in. All right. Next up, this one. Sam, Samjana, Ajay. Yep, everyone's saying two. The correct answer is two only. We must not show partiality to our relatives, right? So to some certain people, two is the correct preference here because I mean that's as I mentioned before, there's no real golden rule. It just comes from deliberate practice, right? So whenever you're talking about people, relatives, family, or anyone to our friends or anything, right? In case of plural subject, we usually use to in these cases, showing partiality to always follow showing partiality and things of that nature, right? So keep this in your mind as well. Yep, that's the correct answer. All right, this one. All right, so someone saying for, some are saying against. All right, cool. So, all right. So, for those of you who said against, against is sadly not the correct answer, right? Why? For instance, take a look at this, right? If the sentence read, the laborers are protesting dot 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 hike in their wages, then against might fit in there, right? Because protesting against something, right, might be a particular, I mean, is the proper form of the sentence. But clamoring means to make loud noises again, loud noises for something, right? So in this case, the correct answer is for, because laborers are clamoring for hike in their wages, right? So that's the correct answer in this case. The laborers are clamoring for hike in their wages. They're making a loud noise for that particular cause, right? All right, this one. Take this medicine and you'll get rid dash the bad cold. Absolutely. Samjana, Bimal, Roshan, Jenkins. Uh, Everyone's getting this answer correct. I mean, it's a pretty common sentence structure. The correct answer is definitely off in this case. Take this medicine and you will get rid of the bad cold, right? You're getting rid of diseases, getting rid of common cold, bad cold, getting rid of something, right? Getting rid of something is the proper sentence structure. So note it down if somewhere, if that helps you recall it quite well, because you get rid of something, right? You don't get rid at something or rid from something or rid over something. You usually get rid of something, right? So keep this in your mind. Answer is four. Next up, this. The candidates were tense dash expectancy. All right. With, by, with, by, the answers are quite mixed, right? So the correct answer in this case is with. Why? Because usually expectancy is something, is some sort of an expectation, right? So you usually get tense with something, right? While in some cases you can also get tensed by something, but when you're getting tensed by something, it usually happens to be a physical object or people or things of that nature, right? But expectancy is an idea, an abstract concept, right? So in this case, we get tensed with expectancy, right? Hopefully that makes things clear. Now, next up, we've got this. Aditya says on, Ajay says in. All right. Okay, everyone is saying in, and that in fact is the correct answer. You invest money in something, you don't invest money into something, you don't invest money at something or for something, right? It's always invested in something, right? So keep that in your mind as well. Money is invested, or anything is invested in something. So keep that in your mind as well. So now, lastly, we'll be moving on to the final discussion or the final subject matter of today's discussion. Now, in these questions, a part of sentence has grammatical errors and the other parts have got no grammatical errors. Our job is to find which part of the particular sentence has got a grammatical error, right? So the example that I'll be showing you will directly be moving on to practice problems. There won't be any examples. Hopefully you guys can figure out this question because it's really easy, it's really trivial. You guys can do this. So we've got a sentence, how I wish it had been me whom you had chosen and not she, right? So you have to figure out which part of this sentence is grammatically incorrect. All right, I'll be waiting for a few participants to send their answers. I'm getting answers from Ajay, Chandani, Samjana. And in these sort of sentences, I'll be walking you guys through this entire process or the thought process, right? So you guys don't need to worry if you're confused at the moment. All right, the answers are quite mixed, it seems. Some are saying 4, some are saying 1, some are saying 3. So the correct answer in this case is option number 4, right? Or option number D in this case, right? How I wish is a proper grammatical sentence structure. It simply means how desperate you are to gain something, right? How I wish, right? So that sentence structure is pretty common in literature, right? So it's correct, right? That's all I'm saying. Now, how I wish it had been me, right? So this is correct as well. It had been me. It's a proper sentence structure. Verb that we're using is the have verb. The V3 of this particular verb had been, right? Whom you had chosen and not she, right? So now this second part is correct as well. Now, whom you had chosen, right? Whom you had chosen. Now, this is correct as well. Whom you had chosen. That simply means that your choice should have been someone or should have been someone. It's basically implying that particular sentiment, right? Now, why fourth is incorrect grammatically is because it should have been her in the end, right? If you had chosen and not her, right? If it were her, then it would have been correct. But since it's she, it does not really fit in with this sentence well, right? So the correct answer is option number 4 here. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Cool. Next up, this. I'll be waiting for a few seconds. All right, so someone is asking in the chat about how to be 100% sure in these cases, right? So the thing about the sentence correction or is it just comes through deliberate practice, right? Or you have to figure out some key checkpoints as well, right? So for instance, in some part of the sentence, the subject may not agree with the verb, right? So there may be a subject verb disagreement in some cases. In other cases, the tenses that are being used might not really fit into the time frame that the sentence as a whole is trying to depict, right? So those small check marks really sort of contribute to our thought processes of implying whether a particular sentence or the part of the sentence is correct or incorrect, right? So you guys have to look at these small markers, right? So verbs, if they are being used properly, if the subject and verb agree, if the prepositions that are being used are correct, right? Or even in some cases, if the noun, as in the previous case, right? Um, in this case, had it been her, this pronoun, she, her instead of she, this would have been correct, right? So in some cases, there exist weird pronouns in different places of the sentence as well. So you guys have to be mindful about those things, right? You have to critically view every part of the sentence word by word. You don't just skim over it, right? You have to look at it mindfully. So I'm getting most of you are saying, I mean, the answers are quite mixed in the chat box as well. Most of you are saying 4, some are saying 1. So it's quite not clear which the correct answer is. The correct answer in this case is answer number B, right? So that is option number 2. So why is this grammatically flawed, right? So we'll be starting one by one, right? She is one of those persons, right? So for those of you who said that 1 was grammatically incorrect, I'm assuming that you meant that persons sounds only weird in this context. So You thought maybe people or some other word could have been used. But persons is an absolutely correct word. It's used in most sentences as well. People, persons, they are used to represent the same sentiment, the same idea of a collectiveness, right? So first part of the sentence is right, is correct, right? It's grammatically correct. Whom I'm sure. Now we'll get back to this later, right? We'll be explaining why three is right and not incorrect, right? Always, who I'm sure, always do their best, right? So one of those people who always do their best. Now look at the subject and the verb, right? So people or persons is a plural subject, right? It represents a collectiveness, right? And in this case, we are using a plural verb as well, right? In this case, do. Do is a plural verb. So the subject and the verb match. So sentence three or the part sentence three is correct as well. Who do their best even in the most trying circumstances, right? That is, I mean, even in the most dire situations, these guys do their best. The last part is not really incorrect. It's completely correct. So most of you who are saying four might have thought that trying is not contextual in this case. It could have been tiring or something else, but trying is the best alternative in this case because it's used to represent a particular circumstance which is really not so good, and so people are trying their best in those circumstances from that sentiment, right? Option number two is incorrect because of this particular pronoun, right? Had it been who instead of whom, this would have been correct. But since it's whom, it's not correct, right? She's one of those persons who I'm sure always do their best, even in the most tiring of times, right? So, whom is not the correct alternative here. This pronoun simply does not fit into this entire thing. It sounds off, first of all. But second of all, it's not the most absolutely correct pronoun in this case, right? Who is the right answer in this case? So, option number B is the correct answer. Next up, we've got this. All right, I'll be waiting for a few. All right, so most of you are saying option number one in this case, but some of you are saying option number two, three. So the answers are basically mixed, right? So the correct answer in this case is option number two, right? I'm given, I'm given is a perfectly valid sentence structure, right? I'm given a particular thing to do. I'm given a particular task to complete, right? These perfectly make sense. I'm given is the correct sentence structure, right? Now, to do, at the same, at the, that's also grammatically correct, right? And the same time, obviously, that's just two words. They fit in quite well with each other, right? Now, why two is not correct in this case is because of this particular thing, right? The thing is, I'm given too many works to do at the same time might have represented concurrency, right? Now, the entire idea of this sentence is doing at the same time, right? That is to mean the task that you're doing at the moment is simultaneous, right? Now, there is no hard and fast rule that to has to be the replacement of so in this particular case, right? But the thing is, to makes sense. Why? Because too many works to do at the same time represents the idea of simultaneity in this case. What do I mean by this is it represents the fact that you're doing too many works at the same time, right? Right? Hopefully that makes things clear as well. That's the first, right? Now, in second, works is not really used as a noun in this case as well, right? The thing is, I'm given too many works to do at the same time does not make sense because work should be used as a noun in this case, right? That is to mean work is something that you do, albeit it's an abstract concept. It's something that you do, right? But in this case, it's being used as a verb, right? When you add as to the noun, it becomes a verb. Works is a verb while work is a noun, right? So in this case, works does not make sense because you are being given tasks to complete, right? And in this case, when you start using works instead of work, that does not make sense, right? So what we have to do is use the proper noun instead of the verb. So too many work to do at the same time makes sense, or so many work to do at the same time also makes sense, but more inclination towards two, right? Because it represents concurrency. So with both of those logics, you could have gotten to two being the incorrect, grammatically incorrect sentence structure. Now, the thing about this is it was a bit confusing considering the previous two examples, because you had to see the distinction between verb and a noun and where they are usually used, right? So in this case, works represents a verb, but work has to come as a noun in this case. So sentence true two is not correct, right? All right, so the thing is, in the previous question, there was a small confusion, and I quickly saw that in the chat box, right? So someone is asking about subject verb agreement in 1 and 3, right? So the thing about this is one of those persons represents a plural form in this case, right? As I mentioned before in subject verb agreement, plural subjects take plural verbs, right? Do is a plural verb, does is a singular verb. So does not fit in well in this entire sentence structure, right? So do is the best alternative and do is the correct answer in this case, right? So sentence three is not grammatically flawed, right? Considering that we are taking persons as a reference. I mean, it should be taken as a reference in this case, right? So hopefully that makes the question that was imposed previously clear. With that said, let's move on. Yep. So with that, we've come to the end of our discussion. Hopefully it was fruitful for everyone. Hopefully you guys got to learn new things. Now, as I was mentioning before, there are plethora of resources in the internet, but you have to properly read through correct resources. And I've tried my best to accumulate resources at this page, which will be really fruitful for the examination that you guys are going to appear on. So take a screenshot of this thing and hopefully and practice from this, right? Because as I mentioned before, there is no golden rule that basically implies that a particular thing is right in grammar and the other thing is wrong, right? So there is no real black and white, right? I mean, conceptually, there does not exist such a thing. But with deliberate practice, it will be more easier to nitpick the correct options from the incorrect ones. So go through all of these resources, and that's it for this session. Thank you, everyone.
So guys, I think we are not done yet. So if you want to scan the QR code and download our app, please do it right now. So we are leaving with this screenshot for a few minutes so that you all can download the app and then you can start practicing.